Afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our panelists and obviously the audience members who are just joining us right now. Thanks for being here. We're so very pleased that you could join us. We're delighted, as always, to continue collaborating with. Okay, let me start that again. We're delighted to continue collaborating with Conversations in Contemporary Art convener Maya Ray Oppenheimer to bring you the second half of the 2020-2021 SICA season. Concordia's fourth space, physically located on unceded Indigenous land in downtown Tiohtià:ke, is a university-wide platform focused on working collaboratively with our community across disciplines to activate research, teaching, and the various initiatives happening at the university via process-based exploration. Which is why we're very delighted to host this season of SICA and today's conversation specifically. Before passing things over to Maya, just a few notes. As always, the chat function is activated for any comments or reflections that you might have throughout. We'd ask you to choose from the drop-down menu to choose to share your comments with panelists and attendees to ensure that everybody can see your comments throughout the session. And if you have any questions that you like our conversationalists to address today, we ask you to either raise your virtual hand and you can unmute yourself and join the conversation by speaking using your voice, or obviously you can use the Q&A, which is activated for all to see as well. And they'll signal to us that we should address this question publicly. Thanks, everybody. So it's now my pleasure to pass things over to Maya. Over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the handover. As always, Anna, it's always nice to have that buffer where we're in the Zoom space and trying to catch our bearings. So I just have a few introductory remarks to SICA to also extend that buffer of commensality and cheer and goodwill to our guest today. So as Anna mentioned, I'm the convener of Conversations in Contemporary Art, which is a visiting speaker series run out of the Department of Studio Arts at Concordia University and is supported by the MFA program and donor support. And we're gathering in the Zoomosphere, the Zoom tube, the Zooms, whatever term of endearment you might want to call it to make it seem a bit gentler. And I want to take a moment to reflect on what that means in terms of connecting with one another. Usually SICA, as it's affectionately known, gathers in a lecture space, a lecture theater, and that of course tends to mold and shape the way we relate with one another. Juan and Zinnia, who I'll introduce in a moment, would be on a podium or a stage. You would be, in fanning seats, not necessarily seeing one another. But what Zoom does allow us to do is gather like an ecosystem. Zinnia, Juan, myself, Anna, Concordia University are located in Tiohtià:ke, Muniang, Montreal, which is on unceded Kanien'kehá:ka land. But you are also joining us from many different constituencies, from many different locations, and in many different situations. So let's keep in mind that we are an ecosystem through the course of this talk, because I think connections and conversation is really going to come across in what Zinnia and Juan are going to share with us today. And one of the ways that we can do that for each other, not just with Zinnia and Juan, is by using the Zoom chat. If you toggle the button in the Zoom chat to share with panelists and attendees, you will all also be able to connect with one another. And what I would invite you to do is to take a moment to say hello to Juan and Zinnia, but also to each other. Let us know where you're joining us from, but also what you're bringing with you. What are you connecting to at the moment? And that can be something that you've seen in your neighborhood today. It can be something that's on your mind. It can be something that you're drinking or eating to nourish yourself. All three of us had a chat before the video about tea and what we're nourishing with. But I think that's an important theme that will come up in our conversations today, this idea of connection. And SICA as a platform this year, whether you've joined us for our past SICA talks or this is your first afternoon with us, has been exploring radical hospitality as a method, as a conversation frame, also as a position for practicing. What does it mean to invite folks to share their energy and time during a pandemic? What does hospitality look like in a time of emergency? How do we connect when we are also in lockdown under curfew, which is the civic situation in Georgiaga at the moment? So this idea of connecting is not only part of our ethos, but also part of how Juan and Zinnia are relating to one another. The blurb for this talk suggests that it's a conversation not only about artistic practice, but also about friendship, right? And I think that's a really beautiful thing that's coming up in some of our recent SICA conversations is friendship as practice. And that connection that two practitioners have can be to one another, to land, to investigations and concepts and theories, like Zinnia and Juan both share, relationships to thinking about creating images, relationships between objects, conversations with audiences, how to take space in platforms in artist-run centers, exhibitions, talks like this one, residencies, classrooms with students, but also, connections to art school. Zinnia is a recent graduate of Concordia University in the MFA program. Juan is a new faculty member, but also did his BFA at Concordia. So with this meandering and now too long introduction of our speakers, I leave you with, an impression of ecosystems, of connections, of returns, of careful thinking and grappling about what it means to be practicing and hosting conversations. So at this point, I'm very happy to hand this microphone, this Zoom space over to Zinnia and Juan. I'll put links to their websites in the chat so you can explore their bios in more detail in terms of the international and national exhibition spaces they've worked with and through, and to also see some more of their images and be in touch with them. So without further ado, thank you so much, Juan and Zinnia, for joining us. And I'll shut my screen off now, and we can field queries and conversation as we go. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Maya.
Thanks, Maya. Are we on the main page already? Yeah.
I think so.
Okay, so thanks everybody. Thank you, Maya, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you, Anna and Doug and Sika and Fourth Space and everybody for being here. It's sort of lovely to see all the messages from people sort of joining from all parts of the world. And it's heartwarming to know that there are people at the other end of this and listening out there on the interwebs. When I was first asked to do a talk as part of Sika, I wasn't sure how I was going to go about it because I knew that it was going to be through Zoom. And so much, to me, so much about artist talks, they're about presence. So within the theme of hospitality, I thought maybe I could just invite somebody to do a talk with me. And I immediately thought of my friend Zinnia. Hi, Zinnia.
Hey.
Do you have your tea?
Yes, I have my tea.
And I thought that we could just have this conversation about each other's practices and talk about friendship and tea, and then share the platform. And I also think that the question of hospitality as it relates to place and migration has a resonance with your practice, Zinnia. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, first of all, I also want to say thank you to everybody for putting this talk together, Maya, Anna, Dan, and Juan for inviting me to share this space because, it's an honor. I just graduated from MFA at Concordia. I sat through so many Sika talks by so many artists I admire, including yourself, Juan. And although we're friends, I also say that your work has some influence on my practice. So I'm excited to kind of look at these threads between our works as well. And I don't know, I think it's also important to, because that happens with friendship and with, working in a certain community of people, and we don't always acknowledge it, but I'm excited to kind of do that today as well.
Amazing, thank you. Okay, so should we share some works?
Yeah, I guess so. So yeah, we wanted to talk a little bit too, I guess I wanted to mention like the theme of hospitality was the sort of framework for the Sika lectures this year, and that was one of the reasons also you invited me to share the space, Juan. And we were both kind of wondering how this fits into our practices in terms of environment. So to kick it off, and also I guess in thinking in relation to that theme specifically, we wanted to talk about your work, La Guardia Morada. So we'll start with that one because it's very, very specific to environment, I think. So yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna do a screen share. Make sure that I have this right. I think that looks good, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just gonna move a couple of things around here. Okay, Zinnia, did I ever tell you the story about this road where I grew up?
No, I hope I get to see it one day.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
So there's a road where I grew up that goes up to the mountains, and there's a rainforest up in the mountains, and it's a very popular rainforest. It's called Monteverde, and it's an incredibly popular destination. And the road basically is like a meandering road, and then it rains about 8 months a year. So the road is gravel and muddy, and it's very difficult to go up there. So at one point there was a discussion in the government whether they should pave the road and fix the road, which obviously would benefit tons of people and like local farmers and whatnot, because they can get their product up and down the mountain. And then there's like so many, like an incredible amount of tourists going up there. There's resorts and hotels and whatnot. But then essentially after the conversations, they decided that they wouldn't pave the road, that all the tourists from Canada and the US and Europe, they preferred to have this sort of like 4x4 style, road trip out the mountain. And that's kind of Costa Rica. It's full of artificial experiences of natural environments. It's sort of like the flip side of an economy based on ecotourism. And you're gonna see when you go there, because I know that you have an upcoming trip to Costa Rica.
One day.
One day. So you can like zip line through the rainforest canopy, or you can rent a cabin with air conditioning and TV satellite in the jungle. And I'm interested in that. I'm interested in those kinds of experiences and how they come with fantasies of tropical exoticism and wilderness. I always thought of this project that is called La Guardia Morada as a kind of homage to Costa Rica. The plant name, the plants that you see here, they're rainforest orchids. And as rainforest orchids, obviously they need tons of water and humidity to survive. And they're also the national flower of Costa Rica. So I spent just about a year and a half growing them in my studio, and I set them up in the gallery space between an industrial humidifier and these 4 dehumidifiers. And in that way, they were sort of like caught between these 2 forces, this kind of like push and pull. One force that was prompting them to develop and grow and bloom, and the other force that was doing the opposite, that was keeping them from developing, growing, and blooming. And I kind of think of that as a metaphor for the region, as sort of like being caught between these 2 forces, right? And I think the dehumidifiers can even be a stand-in for external forces, whether that be like manipulation and foreign influence and exploitation and control and whatnot. The installation came with a series of instructions that they were posted at the entrance of the gallery. And I think you came to this opening. I remember that we talked about it a little bit. And it really involved the gallery staff in the exhibition. So they had to follow the instructions, which told them, okay, you have to empty the tanks of the dehumidifiers into the humidifiers. You had to keep the lights at a certain times, and you had to keep the heating in place at a certain temperature. So it's very much rooted in the gallery, in the lighting system of the gallery, in the heating system of the gallery. And they had to care for the plants. And it's one thing that I sort of really enjoyed about this project was that I had to have a different relationship with the material that I normally have with other materials, in the way that I had to like really care for these objects in my studio.
Right. Can I, are you?
By all means.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. So I wanted to talk specifically also about, because the images that you're showing, I know you showed this work at Optica a year or 2 ago. And I was thinking about this work specifically into our theme of kind of like environment and care. And it's interesting because you frame this work as kind of an homage to Costa Rica, but for me, and also the way we experienced it at Optica, you know, like coming in from this like frigid Canadian winter into the gallery space that you've transformed into this tropical space of like push and pull with the humidifiers and dehumidifiers. So I wanted to ask you, for me, this experience of the work was a very stark contrast to kind of Canada. And I kind of read that as like a metaphor for you and your trying to make an environment here. So I wanted to ask about that. If you could talk a bit more about that.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit about that. I mean, I think some of the works they have like a personal sort of biographical content for me that is important, that is there sort of subdued. I don't want it to be only about that or specifically about that, but even if it is only me who sees that, I think it's something that I care about. And then, yeah, I do think of myself a little bit like those plants and being a little bit, you know, out of place and kind of like a little bit of fish out of water in a different climate and sort of like trying to adapt and adjust. So yeah, I can see that.
But for you, it's like you would show this, like it's not specific to being here for you, this work. It's more of a homage to the where you're from and the.
Well, I never thought about it in those terms. I do think like I devised it specifically for Canada, for a gallery in Canada. And then I've only showed it in 2 places in Canada. And it was very much with that in mind, with the fact that it was going to be a gallery in Canada. And not only that, it was going to be in the winter too. So both times it was specifically, you know, scheduled to happen in the winter, because as people would enter the space, the humidity accumulated in the space would feel like a tropical environment, and it would be incredibly dry outside. Right. So the first time that I showed it was a truck gallery in Calgary, which is like famously very cold and dry. And the humidifier is so strong that it does create like another ecosystem or atmosphere within the gallery. I actually have video documentation of how the system works in the gallery. So this is a truck. And I never really thought about exhibiting them anywhere else. They really kind of happen for this context to me, and they just kind of made sense for me within this context.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of wondering about, is that if it was meant to be, because I think especially the you know, when showing it in the contrast to the winter context, it does add another element. Not to say, I think I did also see it in summer, or I guess it was a different variation at TBW.
But, yeah, that was when I had like that one orchid. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So, but it's such a stark, you know, a hyper control to something, you know, in contrast to something that we can't control outdoors.
Yeah, true. I mean, I do see the project as being about kind of like the legacy of the post-colonial region as being sort of caught between these 2 forces of development and stagnation. And to me, it becomes interesting to present that here. In a North American context and whatnot.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. I think maybe we can switch gears and talk about one of your works. I think
sure.
That's what
Yeah, okay, sure. We do have a question from Salen. I don't know if we want to kind of...
yeah, let's tackle them. Yeah. Pick them up. Thank you for the questions. We're happy to see signs of life.
Just to, in relation to La Guardia Morada, so Salen, hey Salen, is asking, I was always curious about whether this project was influenced by Hans Hack wind and water systems and work of the 60s. And we know that you're, you know, have a big sort of modernist influence on your work as well. So that's what Salen is asking.
It wasn't a direct reference to it, but it's definitely a piece that I love. And then I do in several of the works include historical references, or if they're not references, they're more like homages or kind of like, you know, nods to people that I admire. So some of them are Hans Hack, but some of the other pieces that I'm going to show later on would be Felix Gonzalez Torres. And there are references or nods to their practices, but never in a kind of direct way as sort of like feeding off of that piece in terms of content or anything like that. It's more like, yeah, just as a gesture of like somebody I admire who I know I can put like, you know, an undertone of an acknowledgement in there. And thank you, Salen, for the question.
Yeah.
So the next piece that we're going to talk about is called Heart-Shaped Box. And I love this piece. I think this is how we met, is when you were exhibiting this.
Yeah, so I'll show you some installation pictures afterwards, but so yeah, how we met actually, if we want to kind of go into that story, was Juan had a solo show at Gallery 44 in Toronto in the 401 Richmond building, and I was exhibiting this piece in the vitrine at Trinity Square Video, which is just down the hall. And they usually do kind of a collective opening. And I met Juan at his show, and it was beautiful. And then being Mr. Friendly, being like, oh, you live in Montreal, we should be friends. And so then, yeah, we started hanging out. And it was interesting because I don't know if you've seen this work before, really, or like until recently. And so, yeah, I'm curious to kind of get your reaction also to the work. But
yeah, I'm really looking forward to discuss it. Should we play it and then we talk about it?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so here we go.
This is my room. Okay, and where is it? Oh. This is Kurt Cobain, and that's the CD. And that is some person, I forget their name, that's there we go. And that's Ethan Hawke. Here, love. That's Courtney Love, his wife, Max, and there they are again.
A pretty song, William. Life was never long, but she likes the shoes, but don't know what her name. Don't know what her name.
Forever and after your private advice. Hey, wait, I got a new complaint.
Zinnia,
What?
headbang. That's not right. No, don't use your hands. Just headbang. That's better. To your priceless advice. Advice.
I'm tired.
Calm down.
I'm sugar high.
She has made like a passive when I am weak. I've been locked inside your heart-shaped box.
Is it taping right now?
Oh,
Sabrina.
do a proper smile.
You have
Smile.
to say cheese and then smile.
Okay, say cheese.
Cheese.
Sing for me. Sing. Hey, wait, I got a new complaint.
Okay. She has me
Like a parsley when I turn black.
Stop. Nina's gonna do a solo.
to your heart-shaped box
For weeks.
Hey, wait! I got a new complaint.
Forever and death to your heart. This
Goodbye.
adviceless, faceless place.
Your advice. Your advice.
Okay.
Somebody likes to sing his gun, but I don't know what his name. Don't know what his name is.
Sure, why not?
Oh, go on, take everything I want you to. Go on, take everything I want you to.
And how does she put her hand on her face? No, one hand.
This one.
Yeah, that one. Yeah.
Go
Oh,
on,
pretty.
take everything. Take everything. No, she does.
Go on, take everything I want you to.
Go on, take everything I want you to.
Okay, that's
wish I could eat your hands so when you would rock. Yeah, yeah. Hey, wait, I got a new complaint.
That's amazing. I love that work so much. Hopefully everybody was able to hear it and see it well. We did some tests for playing video back, because I know through Zoom sometimes the sound can get cut up and then the playback cannot be as smooth. So hopefully it was great for all of you to appreciate that. I really like that even at 3 years old, you were thinking about photography. I like how you were correcting your sisters and telling them, oh no, you have to say cheese and then smile.
No. So I'm the kid, right?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I guess, yeah, you're right. I do have to say cheese in this. Yeah, okay, sorry, keep going.
So where I'm going with this is that I feel like all of the elements in your work are very suggestively interconnected. So
Right.
photography, video, memory, and the archive. So my first question is whether you were interested in the archive first, or photography came second, or whether you were interested in photography first, and then you started become interested in the archive.
Yeah, so I mean, with this work, and if you don't mind switching to the install pictures, so I work with Family Archive a lot in my practice, and I've done that in different sort of capacities, mostly using sort of like the photographic archive. But with this work, I came across this home video footage of, so my family moved to Canada in 91, and I was born in 91. And it was obviously just kind of shocking to see this piece of footage, because it's actually really funny, even like just a little bit prior to the part that I showed. This is that my dad had just bought a camcorder, and the first thing that my sisters kind of do is they decide to like pick it up and show their posters, which is also like a very interesting kind of funny act, I think. But they were super proud of their kind of domestic space in this situation. And so I love this. Well, I mean, it's obviously like it's a vulnerable position for me, and it's like a little embarrassing to be showing 100 people this home footage of me as a baby singing Nirvana songs. But I love it because I think it's a nice kind of break in humor. And this like I was saying before, this installation was from Trinity Square Video in Toronto. I recently also did another iteration at Pop Montreal. If you want to go to the next slide, one. In which I made a bedroom and sort of filled it with posters and other artifacts. Some of those are my actual bedspread from my sister's room and stuff that I still have. I love the kind of sense of humor and just kind of remembering this act of like joy and jovialness as well from the time. But what I look for a lot in sort of family archives when I work with them is, obviously there's a personal element, but I'm also kind of trying to see beyond that. So with this footage, it's weird that I'm singing these Nirvana and Kurt Cobain songs, but when I saw it, because I didn't remember doing this, singing these songs, but I did remember the lyrics to the song. So when I saw this footage again, I was kind of like, oh, this like makes a lot of sense as to who I am as a person. And I like to show it as an introduction to me, because it's also like a lot of my work is about migration and family archive and citizenship. But when I think about like who I am culturally and my cultural influences, it's like, oh yeah, like Kurt Cobain, Nirvana, and Hole are my cultural influences, although they, don't not, and other things are too. And it's not expected that like two young Pakistani girls would be so into this kind of, punk, post-punk, grunge, like counterculture. And that's also like, I'm kind of going on, but I'd love to hear what your relationship to it too, Juan, because grunge culture was meant to be counterculture, and it was meant to be like anti-capitalist, and it became mainstream, and it became something that a lot of people who are maybe on the margins sort of latched onto in different ways. And it's not like you wouldn't expect these like young Pakistani girls to be so into it, but they were. And then as a result, I was like as well. And it's also part of my culture in a way. So like in thinking about like cultural influence, it's an interesting piece in that way for me. I don't know if you relate to it in that way.
I definitely relate. I mean, as somebody who was a teenager in the 90s, I mean, Nirvana, oddly enough, in this very small town in Costa Rica of like 2,000 people, that was my cultural reference. And the way that it happened there was, number one, it was a way for me to learn English. That's how I learned English, was singing Nirvana songs and Pearl Jam and like Depeche Mode. But it was also about sort of like dreaming of this other culture and wanted to go there and kind of like yearn for it in a way. And it's a way, it was kind of like an entry point into it
Right.
for me. I guess it's a kind of sequel to what you were saying about public and private space. I feel like your work engages with that interplay between the public and the private space. Sort of like the personal archive, the video recording, the family album in public space and display. So I think you intuited a little bit to that, but is that a difficult road to navigate? Because I feel like there's a vulnerability there, you know, how much to reveal and what to reveal and conceal, then how do you navigate those things?
Yeah, that's definitely tough. And I think it varies with each project as well. Like it is maybe a little vulnerable to be kind of showing this footage, but and when I first wanted to work with this footage, my sisters were actually not super happy to have it shown, but then eventually they came around because I think when you kind of get that moment of relatability, I think that's a really important kind of tool to help open people up and like think about the aspect in a different way. So for me, like I use the personal in that way as to be like, yeah, this is just like a fun piece of video footage, but culturally, what is it kind of alluding to also? And also thinking about the audience. So when I show this work at Trinity Square, and that's kind of going to lead into some of your other work as well, it was in a hallway, and next door was a daycare. And so there was a lot of kids passing by as well, and parents. And so kids really like this work because, you know, it's pink and there's kids singing and there's like a colorful objects. But also I think the parents were like hit with a pang of nostalgia. When I was installing too, people were like, oh my God, my bedroom looked like this, you know, growing up. And I was like, yeah, a lot of people did. And then you see the footage. And so it kind of like brings you, it's a privilege to be able to kind of look back on moments of your life too, and then also think about the kind of larger implications of those moments. So yeah.
Something else before we move on that I think it's going to become apparent as we see some of the other images of your work is that I can see sort of traces of art historical genres like still life and portraiture in your practice. Is that something that you actively sort of like research about to bring into your work, or is that something that just kind of like happens as you're working through these things?
It just happens. I'm always trying to find different ways to push. Also, like, you know, with working in the archive, I don't want it to become stagnant. So in the work we're going to talk about later, like that was my first time kind of, I had never really actually worked with still life before, and I didn't really have much interest in it, but I'm always trying to find new ways to also kind of control my working environment. So that's also a big part of it as well. And yeah, I'd be curious to hear about your working process as well with some of the work that we're going to look at, because I think you have, you know, similar sort of aesthetic impulses from what I'm gathering. But
I think so.
Yeah,
that's why we're friends too.
Yeah, I don't think that's why we're friends, but I think it works out that way. But I definitely think we have, you know, we tend to have influence on one another. I mean, I think you have more influence on me, but
no, it's a two-way street. Okay, should we move on?
Yeah, so we're going to talk about your work that is currently up at Voxed.
Oh, we missed one image, sorry.
Oh yeah. So yeah, you can see I bring in all of that stuff is stuff that I have. I also tend to, well, luckily my parents have a house and they don't throw things away. And then now that I've started making art with these random objects, they're very careful about throwing these things away. So I've been able to kind of bring stuff from home for a lot of these installations. Yeah, so we wanted to, did you want to go into talking about this work, Tropicana? I have some questions. Actually,
about this one first?
Yeah, I'm going to start with my first question. Would you describe yourself as a hoarder?
Definitely. But I'm a strategic hoarder. So I accumulate things, but then I do get rid of things. So it's not like endless accumulation, but I do tend to like, pile things up, and then I do make purges where it's like, okay, well, this can go to Renaissance and find another life.
Right.
But for example, I have almost every National Geographic since it was invented,
Oh,
which was
really?
like it was like late 1800s, and it was diagrams before it was photographs.
Right.
And it's like hundreds and hundreds of them that I have in boxes. And it's incredible because you can see the history of photography being played out as you go through the years, and also the history of print and writing. I'm going on a little bit of a tangent, but yeah, I do.
And you've collected them over the years?
I actually found them for free on Kijiji. Somebody was
Wow.
given the entire collection, and it took me a U-Haul van and like 4 trips back and forth from Verdun to go and get them. But
Wow, that's great. Yeah, I was thinking about that because, well, I'm impressed that you're able to get rid of them, because even with my installations are not very big, but I'm like, like, oh, you never know when this can be used again. So I'm impressed that you're able to, like, how do you decide when you're done with an object?
how do I decide when I'm done with it?
Yeah.
That's a very good question. Well, I think of the objects as kind of like characters that I can bring into the installations. So when I bring them out of the boxes and then I put them for display, I think that they're kind of auditioning to be in the show in a way. And each one is playing, a role and a part in the overall thing.
Right.
But then I guess it becomes a point where I feel like they can no longer play a role that I'm interested in for the show. And I pass them on.
That's amazing. I love that. I actually want to ask a little bit more about this animating, but maybe we should watch your video and then, or
Right.
if you want to say something, and then we can talk more about that.
Well, this, like you mentioned, this is the show at Vox, which is, under lockdown, obviously. Hopefully it will be open and people will go and see it. The show is more or less about the language of advertising and product display, how it uses tropes of the tropical and the exotic and the natural for presenting things and selling things. So I just have a couple of views. There's 3 rooms in the show. So you can see the second room towards the back. And this is the same room, but just a different view. And so this is the video. And obviously the video is not gonna look amazing because it's meant to be like a 30 feet wide projection. And the sound is like super important for it. And it's not gonna sound great through headphones, but anyways, maybe let's watch the video and then you can ask me the question and we can talk about it.
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to link to the video on your website too. So.
Okay. can stop it before because it's long. It's like 7 minutes.
No, it's not.
Should we
A
keep
little
on
bit
going?
left, right? Okay, that's
Oh, I'm muted. I was just trying to catch up with the questions.
yeah. Well, we can. Oh, okay, you can answer them if you want, or we can.
Yeah. Well, I just saw one by Melanie, and she's asking whether the videos in one sequence in the installation, each room has its video. So no, it's just one. I mean, I have images of the rest of the installation, but the main room has the video, and then there's some 3D rendering and light boxes in the other rooms and some other works.
Yeah, so I mean, there's so many things I want to ask you about these works. And, I love actually having this kind of image that you put into my head now of you auditioning the objects. So that I feel like that actually really changes the way that I view the video, because they're already like brought, like right from the get-go, they're brought to life when you're even selecting them. And then maybe now it's kind of a matter of just performance for the screen. So I wanted to ask a little bit about documentation, because, you leave in, for example, the recorder in the video, and even I know in some of the animation works you leave in sort of like the tripod leg and things like that. So how does documenting kind of further this animation for you with the objects?
Yeah, and it was kind of like a bit about making the kind of like the apparatuses of video production apparent or visible. So like in the video, you do see the video recorder, and in the objects that are reflective, you see the camera, and then you see myself making the video. And then I think that I showed that image already, but then there's a light with the tripod in the main space as well. And then the windows have light gels to change the color to this blue with spring clamps. So it's all kind of like about revealing the apparatuses of video making and production. And again, kind of like following this language of advertising and make believe.
Right, and like
I was going to ask you a question.
Oh yeah, well, yeah, go ahead.
Have you heard about sympathetic magic?
No, I haven't.
Okay, because that's one of the things that I was reading about that I was really excited for the video. So basically in sympathetic magic, there are two laws. So there's the law of similarity and the law of contagion. And the law of similarity says that you can affect something by means of essentially mimesis or replica. So if you have something that looks like something else, you can affect that other. And then the law of contagion, which is basically you can affect something that has been in touch with that other thing that you want to affect. And I was really interested for those things for thinking about material culture and
Right.
commodity fetishism. Because I feel like that's what advertising does. It tends to draw from natural sources, from anthropomorphic sources, or zoomorphic references to infuse things with power, essentially.
Right. Yeah, there's a strong sense of sort of like irony as well, and maybe like also like you're using humor, but also critical of consumer culture and even like fads like ASMR in your work, and I guess that also kind of relates to like Aria Marada, where you're talking about the like artificialness of the natural experience in Costa Rica. So I don't know if you want to talk about like linking these ideas a little bit.
Of the artificiality of the two?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think so. It's not something that I kind of like consciously research, but I am quite interested in ways of, like in the ways that advertising and commodity fetishism tends to present things as natural when they aren't really natural. They're just kind of like manufactured and sort of like, yeah, constructed in one way or another.
Right.
But I really think that material culture totally believes that things have magical qualities. It just doesn't usually get acknowledged as such, you know? So that cars and brands and clothes can affect your identity and status and even change your very being.
Right.
So that's something that hopefully these installations try to explore.
I think they do, because I mean, I think, you know, there's a very strong sense of emotion that we're getting, well, even by looking at the images, but I'm sure I'm moving through the space. I think somebody said, yeah, they called it satisfying things. And I think we're thinking about that even more because of, you know, being trapped inside and this whole impulse of, if I buy something on the internet, it's going to make me feel better. So this almost like escapism through like these, like through texture and through sound and all these things that you're highlighting. So I have another question about the show, but someone else, Erin McIntosh, is also asking, I can see so many aspects of fetish in this work. Can you speak to whether psychoanalytic concept leaning towards sexual desire, object choice, is more important for you than the colonial historic misunderstanding of ritual objects? Or does your work embrace all these things? Also, any thoughts on camp aesthetics?
Well, that's very, okay. I think yeah, I'm interested in both. I'm interested in how, like, if you look at the definition of fetishism, for example, like it can be something that you believe has like animistic qualities, that has, you know, kind of power and an agency of its own. But fetishism is also a sexual investment in an object. And I think commodity fetishism constantly switches between the two. And I tend to want to make reference to that, to the kind of like sexual investment in an object, on par with an investment in an object as thinking that it has magical qualities.
And I think you see that too also with, I mean, I don't know if we have time to show it now, but with the animation, I think that was actually a really interesting trajectory of your work. So these, I guess these two are light boxes that we're seeing now. And then there's a video later on.
There's the animation, so I'm gonna just kind of go through these. So these are presented in light boxes, as you can see, sort of kind of like the language of advertising, and they're computer generated images, so they're all like 3D rendered. And then this is just another view of the show, and I was taken on this motif of the splash, for example, as a kind of shorthand for freshness, which I feel like, you know, I'm interested in those tropes and motifs that advertising using all the time. And I'm quite interested in the transformation that happens in the journey from raw material to a commodity. If you think of that, what happens there, how things are again infused with certain qualities, so that at the end, a bottle of cream is not just a plastic container, but then it becomes a sign of something. And these are the light gels over the windows and the spring clamps. So this is one of the renderings, and then on the right side is the animation. So I'm gonna play that. I think that should work okay. The idea behind this rendering, in essence, was that it was presenting these bottles as they were in a photo shoot. And the animation shows basically the camera traveling around the arrangement in the photo studio, kind of like the moments before the photo was taken or after the photo was taken. That's the basic premise of it.
Yeah, I really love how this is extending sort of this idea of also fabrication in your practice into a whole new level through these like completely artificial renderings. Obviously, there's a reference to those objects, but you're really like pushing the surreal here. But I want to, before we move on, I have a question that I think is important as well. On Vox's website, they describe this exhibition as a children's exhibition or an exhibition for children. And I wanted to ask you about that, what that means, or did you design it for children, or how did that come about?
I definitely did. It's within a specific programming that they have that is called the Youth Exhibition. So they get funding to create this exhibition where the primary audience is youth from the ages of, I think, 4 to 12 is the range. So it is this exhibition that would travel across Canada and possibly other places. And it's I think it's the fourth time that they've done it. I know Skawinati was the person who did it before me. So it is within like a thematic sort of programming context that they have. So it was meant, with that audience in mind, which when it was first proposed to me, like I mean, it seemed like a natural fit for my work. And I was quite excited about the kind of like the challenges, but also the idea of that. So for example, in this room, which is the third room in the exhibition, it has this kind of like library of objects, which are the objects that I used in the video, or most of the objects that I used in the video. And then people are welcome to manipulate the objects and interact with the objects as they are presented on this light table. And I was thinking about like tactility too, in a way, like, with the advent of screens like smartphones and whatnot, like sometimes I feel like tactility has been reduced to the swipe or the scroll with your finger. So the collection of objects are just basically a range of materialities that are not just like glass, but, rubber and all kinds of different things that have been collected. There's over 100 objects in the collection.
So can you choose from the things on the shelves as well?
They're rotated.
What you want to play with?
I think you can, but the idea is that it comes with a sort of like set of instructions. So the person who's in charge of the educational programming, they choose the objects from the library and display them in different ways. So that's kind of like all open to the gallery, how many objects they want to display it and in what arrangement they want to create. But yeah, because a lot of my work is about thinking about how to present an object, how to display an object. So I'm interested in that, in the support structures that can hold an object, the lighting conditions that can affect the perception of an object. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I hope someone, so Jen was asking, are we going to be able to see the show? So hopefully, so that's the big question, I can't wait to get in there. And yeah, because it's like, that's what even the video makes you want to do, is like figure like how to touch and manipulate these objects.
Yeah, I have my fingers crossed. I mean, I don't know for February 8th. I mean, I doubt it. But the gallery is committed to extend the exhibition, I think up to like 2 months past, past the time now, past February 8th. So hopefully it will open to the public. Do we have any other questions before?
We do have a longer one. Do you want to have a look at it? And
I can't see them.
Oh, okay.
I think I
questions.
accidentally closed the Q&A, so I only have the chat.
I wonder if we should maybe come back. Okay, or I can, yeah, okay. I think we're gonna come back to that question, if that's okay, Colin. Okay. We'll come back to it at the end. And yeah, if we...
Is that Colin Courtney?
Yes.
Hi, Colin.
Yeah.
Great, okay. So yeah, because we still have your next project, which is a pretty big project to discuss. And then I have one more project after that, and that's the end of our talk, right? So yeah, to make sure that we can get things in there. So I'm just gonna go through these, and I want you to talk to us about this project that is called, the series is called Yours to Discover, right?
Yeah,
yeah, go ahead, sorry.
Oh, no, yeah. Yeah, I also kind of wanted to contextualize, again, within our friendship, this work. And, I showed you some of these images when I was in the process of shooting them. And you asked me before also about this kind of impulse to use the archive. And this is something that started in my very early beginning of my practice, and something I also wrestle with, because it is sometimes like daunting to constantly be looking back at the family album and talking about personal stories. And I'm trying to find ways all to kind of expand that, talking about the personal, but also kind of expand it to larger thematic. So this work is really thinking about sort of Canadian citizenship and ideals of nationalism as well, but also in the way that I was setting up these works, I was thinking about the way that you set up your installations. And that's why I showed you some of the early work in progress, because I wanted to look at some, I wanted to kind of really engage the viewer in a way I hadn't before. So with this work, I was looking at the very specific moment from my kind of family album. So I'm not in any of these images, but they are from when my family, before they immigrated to Canada, they came as tourists in the late 80s, and they were visiting my mom's sister, who was already living here. And so I'm looking at 3 specific sites, Niagara Falls, CN Tower, and Cullen Gardens. And I was thinking about them. Yeah, if you want to flip through the images, that's cool. So I was thinking about these 3 sites as to, and thinking about tourism and what we are supposed to learn from these tourist sites, and who deems a certain site worthy of being a sort of historic site, and what we're supposed to learn from these sites. So with Niagara Falls, I was thinking about, this trope of like Canadian landscape and the majestic and the rushing waters and all that. With the CN Tower, is kind of, it was the tallest structure in the world for a long time, thinking about modernism and like the Canadian technology and like building capacity. But this site, the Cullen Gardens, is kind of one that a lot of people might not be familiar with. It was a miniature village that was in Whitby, Ontario, just sort of a bit outside of Toronto, and it closed in the early 2000s. But these miniature villages were really popular in the 90s, and so it had these like miniature model communities, and also the gardens with topiary and things like that. And so in this image is very strange, because it's kind of like you see my family looking at this miniature model house, and they're like house shopping in this like model village. Which, and I ended up moving into a suburban community that looks very much like this like mini community as well. So it's almost kind of like they're like, oh, well, this is what a mini museum of the mundane, and this is what Canadian neighborhoods are supposed to look like, and this is kind of like the house we're supposed to buy. So with this work too, I was, because the first images were conceived for a public site, and I was also thinking about my audience and children and families who might be engaging with this work. So I wanted to allude to some of the ideas that I was, some of the kind of themes that I was thinking about through the use of games and building blocks and board games as well, because there's different morals that we are supposed to learn through these games as well. So if you want to go to the board game shop. Yeah, so with Settlers of Catan, you know, this is the game in which we are supposed to build settlements and community and sort of mine natural resources in order to build establishments in the game. But it's also kind of, for me, it is a model of what one does. It's also kind of telling that when you come to this fictional place in Catan, you already have the skills that have been gained in some other place, very much kind of like when you immigrate to Canada, you take skills or whatever savings, like that was the position of my family, being able to come and create an establishment here as well with using the resources that we're giving to them, but they're not given, you know, in equal ways to everyone. So I'm also kind of trying to imply myself as an immigrant settler on the land and what that means to be given certain resources and be able to prosper in certain ways.
Okay, so I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Because I think this is a conversation that maybe we've had sort of casually. I'm not 100% sure that we've done this, but yeah, I want to talk to you about place and belonging. Because for me, having now lived essentially half of my life in Canada and half of it in Costa Rica, I experienced belonging as a kind of in-betweenness. And I remember reading when I was at Concordia, actually, in my undergraduate, Edward Said's memoir, Out of Place. And it really resonated with me, this idea of liminality, of sort of like being at that threshold or something, not really from one place or another, but just sort of like in between those two things. But yeah, I kind of wanted to talk to you about place and belonging a little bit.
Yeah. Are you asking if I resonate with the idea of like liminality?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that it's been a bit of a changing relationship for me. Like I think in some of my early work, it was definitely this kind of idea of feeling like I don't necessarily, you know, fit in with being fully Canadian, but then also I actually feel probably more estranged from my Pakistani identity because I never lived there, I never grew up there. But I was also always like in the kind of early part of my practice, I was always more thinking about this idea of going back and like understanding my culture. But I think that's also something that's maybe started to change even with Heart Shaped Box. It's also kind of resonating like with my culture is actually here, like this is where I'm from. And not to say that that other part of my life doesn't have influence on me, it really does, but I want to kind of address the present more. And I think that that is something that I'm trying to do in this work and my current position. So like even in this work, although again, I'm looking back at different parts of the family album, I'm really trying to like question my own position as an immigrant settler in this work as well. And so I'm incorporating some of my research and parts of the family album, but again, also things that I've sort of objects that I've grown up with.
So I'm just going to go through these because I want to get to the one where, do you want us to show the video now? Because I was going to ask you about when you presented that project in a public space and how the reception of the project changed for you, or how that experience was like of presenting, you know, this kind of like personal archive in a public setting in front of an archive building too.
Yeah, we can talk about that.
Okay, so let me just make it to that image over there. Yeah, it looks beautiful there. I also quite like the way that it looks like construction sites almost, you know, like the images, and they kind of integrate with the building in this really interesting way. And it makes me think about ideas of identity and nationhood and how they are constructed, you know, how they are sort of like arranged as, you know, made up stories and things that we sort of like put together to define identities and nations.
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking about a lot of things. So first of all, this gallery, Peel Art Gallery Museum and Archives, it's in Brampton, which is a very predominantly like South Asian suburb in Toronto. And there's a lot of new immigrants, especially from India and Pakistan and that part of the world. So I wanted to, and across the street from the museum also is a park where obviously a lot of families gather, and the space behind where I'm showing the work is also like a multi-generational programming space. So I really wanted to make work that would sort of resonate for people of all ages. And that was, yeah, something that was important to me. And I was thinking like, how do I do this? And I think through thinking about like, yeah, incorporating different objects and color and also like playfulness, that was one thing I wanted to do with the work. But I had a conversation with a teacher after this work was up, and she was I think a middle school teacher, and she was saying about how she was trying to kind of bring this idea of Canadian identity to this, and she was teaching nearby to her students. And she said in a lot of the work that she would show her students, they didn't really see themselves in a lot of the artwork that she was showing until she showed a work like this, where she kind of, it felt like the students could resonate with this idea also of like visiting of these sites and then being like this position of being, I think I'm also thinking about too, this idea of being a tourist in your own home. And that was another theme that sort of came up with the work as well.
Do you want us to go back to some of these other images?
Sure. Yeah, so yeah, if you like, we can watch the video maybe.
We can watch the video. Okay, well, I do have another question for you.
Yeah, sure.
But it's about authenticity in a way, because I feel like authenticity is carried by photography as a document, right? In a way, because I feel like you assert that authenticity from the archive, but you also challenge it in a way. Is that something that you think about at all, or I'm like way off with that one?
I'm curious to think of, just ask about how the challenge comes through for you.
Well, in the way that feels the staging, I guess I'm thinking about staging and arranging things, and the way that things seem kind of staged within the photograph makes me also think about, yeah, manufacturing, composition, and makes me want to think that you're also, yeah, challenging that authority and authenticity of the image to represent something.
Yeah, I mean, I think with this image in particular, that really resonates because so this was one of the ones where it was just a shot. So the shot in the background is of Cullen Gardens, and it happened to be in the album that I was looking at. So it's an image of a cop car that's stopping this sports car that's presumably speeding or something. And I was thinking about how strange it was that even in this model community, there was still a need for policing, and there's still like, you know, mini cops, and the mini cops are keeping everybody safe in the mini village. And, you know, that's still a thing that we need, even in this utopia. And I thought, A, it's curious that that's there. B, it's curious that probably my dad took this picture, because I was wondering also like, what is he thinking about when he's taking this picture? So these are, again, all kind of ideas that I wanted to bring out. So I guess that's really what I like with the objects that are being arranged in the frame. It's kind of like me thinking about all of these different things together, and how policing is a key part of creating and maintaining a nation state. And even if it is a little fictional world, that's still part of it, and that relates to sort of real life in the world that we're living in. So those are different things that I want to bring together.
Great. Okay, so let's have a look at the video. I think it's this one. Yes. Oh no. Oh, I think we have a link to it, but not the actual video in the PowerPoint.
Oh, that's weird.
Yeah.
Oh, don't worry about it then.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, that's okay.
Let me go back to. Yeah, okay. We can put a link in the chat, because I think do you have it on your website?
No, actually, because this work is to be exhibited later in 2021.
see.
So, but I can just describe, it's basically a video of me playing Jenga with myself. And I'm just kind of like thinking too about this idea of like strategy and different strategies that we have to, the building blocks and kind of things that we have to maneuver in order to just kind of like get through daily life as well with that video. So
there's an interesting sort of like parallel with that other video of mine in the kind of like ASMR sort of like, you know, subtle sounds as you're taking out the pieces. And I quite enjoy obviously the tension that happens when you're trying to like decide, you know, where to make your pick and, you know.
Yeah, and I think that that's again also like kind of the tension of even like creating work like this, and then like pushing, like, you know, alluding to the personal and then bringing in the historical and also the play aspect, and like bringing together all of these parts of the work. And like even with this image, it's kind of a portrait of my dad in a way, but I don't know if anyone would kind of know that if it wasn't for me. But bringing in these elements of like trying to play a certain game and being a landlord and trying to have a good career and support one's family. So these are the kind of like symbols of different parts of the family archive that I'm bringing together in the work.
Okay, I'm not sure how we're doing with time, because I feel like we might have gone past it. My phone says 2:44, so we have 15 minutes left.
Yeah, do you want to talk briefly about this, or do we want to open it up for
questions? I think maybe we just open it up for questions, because I feel like if I talk about it, then we're just going to have like 5 minutes left. So maybe we can just stop the screen share. There.
Yay.
Hi.
Hi.
And yeah, we can go through some of the questions.
So Colin has 2 questions. Maybe let's go back to the one for you.
Yeah.
I'm so drawn to the anthropomorphic qualities of the object's appearance and their sounds juxtaposed with the living creatures. It seems just as much care is given to the artificial environment as is for the creatures. Does this reflect hierarchical, I think? Hierarchical flatness that you hold for both natural and unnatural things that you want to explore? The artificial objects seem to mimic life forms and vice versa. I'm curious if these pairings were hoped to highlight also the absurd hybridity of these produced objects existing in a perilous rainforest ecology as well.
Such a good question, Colin, as always. Yeah, I mean, I do believe in object-oriented ontology firmly. So I do think that things have an agency that is separate from us that we cannot access. And I do think that if we consider that, the implications of that for the environment are really great. Because if you think that things have importance in an agency and they're separate from you, they're harder to discard, you know, to throw away. So I think object-oriented ontology, especially as it is talked about and written about by Jane Bennett and Timothy Morton and a whole bunch of theorists who tried to link the environmental crises with object-oriented ontology theory. So I do think that those, they go together well, and it's kind of like a way forward for thinking about, you know, our crisis in materiality and the environment at the same time. I hope that answers the question, Colin.
Yeah, I think so. Definitely.
I can see the chat now. So do we have more questions?
There's another Q&A from Colin, or yeah. Do you want to read it for me?
Yes. So for Zinnia, I'm curious if the digging into the early archiving of your own early childhood formation as a descendant of South Asian diasporic parents is also aimed to subvert some of the Western colonial imprinting you have experienced by growing up here. It seems that there is a potential of regaining autonomy and agency of your experience in retrospect and building on that through your practice of your work, ? I didn't do the emphasis right, but there's a question mark.
Yeah, absolutely, Colin. I think, you know, I have 2 degrees in photography and studied photo history in my BFA particularly. And I think Well, I also, again, kind of wrestle with this idea a little bit because on the one hand, yeah, I am trying to take control of my own narrative and story and bring importance to that. But I also sometimes question whether, as someone who is, you know, person of color in Canada, am I expected to also speak about my family and history and otherness in my work? And that was something that was encouraged to me very early in my work, and something I still wrestle with because at the end of the day, I'm doing it and I do like to do it. But is that also like what's expected of me? So that's something I kind of wrestle with in my practice as well.
Good answer. And we have a question from Maya. So she says, would you be willing to talk about your relationship to books and language? Zinnia, your writing practice comes to mind. Books also make an appearance in both of your work. So yeah, do you wanna go first and talk about? First. I go first.
Yeah.
Well, I love books. I love reading. It's one of my favorite things. I have done projects that have to do with language and books specifically. I did do a project that it was called Disruptions, where I essentially went into the library and made a series of rearrangements of books. So I was moving books from history to fiction and arranging books by color. So that was like a whole project. It was a video and then a series of photographs. But I don't write. It's kind of like one of my dreams of all time to be able to write because I appreciate reading so much. But you do write, Zinnia.
Oh, well, why is that? I'm curious.
I don't know. Maybe I feel like I don't have that relationship with language where I feel, maybe in Spanish and English is even a little bit harder, but where I don't feel like I have a relationship with language where I can, I don't know, be playful with it and kind of express myself through it in a way that I can think through, I don't know, objects and things.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, it's definitely tough. I've started to write a bit because I just feel like sometimes as an artist, like I'm doing, you know, I could even hardly touch, like, you know, it was a privilege to have this space to talk about it here right now, but sometimes I'm not able to articulate myself as well in speaking through conversation as I am. Like, there's so much research that goes into the work, and I know with yours as well. And as an artist, there's not always place for that to go. And I want to be generous too with my viewers. I don't want them, you know, to be overloaded with information when they come into the gallery. Like some of it, it's kind of like, you know, you can pick up on some of the references that are in the work, or you could not, that's fine. But I do want to give a place for some of those thoughts and connections to form together. So for me, the writing is a place for me to do that. And then if someone wants to read that, then that's great. And then we can have that understanding on that level. But if they don't, that's also fine. But for me, it's kind of like a way for me to justify the connections that are already happening in my head. Yeah, and I know like your work is so densely loaded with, I think, like theory and different references too. So yeah.
Thanks, buddy. We have one more question, and maybe I think we should stop because I think we might be reaching time. But it says, have you done any collaborations with other artists or with each other? So with each other, actually, we never collaborated. This is kind of like our first collaboration is this. Have you collaborated with artists in the past for producing work?
Not directly. Like I'm in a feminist writing collective called Amelia Amalia. And so we do collaborative programming and writing and workshops and things like that. And I'm working on a film work coming up. So that'll be a collaboration, I guess, because yeah, but otherwise, mostly up until now, I've worked pretty on my own. Like even with my family, like I was thinking about this too. Even though I use my parents a lot of my work, and sometimes I shoot them, sometimes they shoot me even, but I wouldn't even call that a collaboration because I don't usually like explain what's happening in my head until afterwards. I kind of like just like, please take this picture, and then I'll just show them later on because I need to like be in my own head for that aspect. Yeah.
Okay, great.
What about you?
Well, same here. I've never collaborated directly with anybody. I am hoping to actually. I've been over the past like 3 or 4 years have become increasingly interested in and working with somebody. So I think it's just a matter of time. So if anybody out there would like to, I'm all ears.
And Luna was asking, how are we put together for this collaboration?
How were you put together for this collaboration? Well, essentially, yeah, they invited me to do a talk as part of SICA. And then I thought I would invite somebody to do a talk with me because I wasn't sure how I was going to deliver a talk to my computer screen. And normally I just like to see people and respond to people's faces in a room. So in this context, I just thought, well, it'll be great if I just invite somebody and I have a conversation with somebody whose work I admire and appreciate, and somebody who's a friend. So this is how we got paired up.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me into the space, into the virtual space. And yeah, no, I admire your work so much, and it's been an influence on me also since we've known each other. So it's really nice to kind of make those connections in our work and just chat. And yeah, gosh.
Thank you, Zinnia. Thank you for being here. Sorry, Maya, I know we're late.
No, not at all. You're perfectly on time. I don't want my turning on the video to be like the specter of shutting off conversation, but rather to say like maybe this is an iteration of ongoing conversations, and to ask for those who are still in the Zoom room with us, where can they follow your work? What's coming up next?
So I guess best way is, yeah, I think they link to my website, and I do post work in progress on Instagram. I mean, things are kind of weird because of the pandemic, but I am in a group show right now at Or Gallery in Vancouver. So there's some programming in relation to that. And I'm working on a new film work that'll hopefully be exhibited sometime this year. So things are in the works, but timelines are shifting because, that's the situation. So yeah.
And yeah, same here. So as I mentioned, I have this show here in Montreal. So if you're in Montreal, hopefully this thing will open and then I can welcome you into it. It will travel, so maybe it will reach you if you're somewhere else at some point, hopefully. But yes.
And also your viral unboxing videos, one of you unboxing videos for the sculpture and ceramics students in the faculty. Those are also, for the record, everyone, quite satisfying to watch. But thank you both, Zinnia and Juan, for your time and energy this afternoon. I think, you've really, through this conversation, shown us how hospitality extends as a method of talking about practice and sharing space in that process. Because the questions you had for each other were considered and insightful and careful. And the framing of having that back and forth throughout the afternoon was a really nice dynamic, absolutely. And you can see that indexed in the comments coming through from the chat as well. So thank you also to Anna, the director of the Space for the digital hospitality, and Doug, who's helped behind the scenes. Thank you, of course, to the MFA program for helping support SICA as a platform and its way of running this year. To Karen, who helps with the promo, to Joni, who also helps with the promo, and of course to all of you for joining us this afternoon and sharing your comments and snacks and thoughts in the chat. Let's keep connecting, let's keep having conversations. It's a way of getting through the isolation.
Thank you so much,
Maya. Thanks,
Maya,
everybody.
and
thank you for
coming.
everybody for attending. I see all the messages and it's quite heartwarming. And yeah, I'm very grateful. So thank you for listening.
Yes, indeed. And if I may, Maya, thank you for activating the chat so well, and everybody for participating. That's really wonderful, and for putting this conversation together. And Juan and Zinnia for this animated enlightening, probably the best way to spend a Thursday afternoon in a while. It's been a real pleasure to welcome you into virtual Space, and we're so grateful for your time and your insights, and all of the attendees. We really appreciate your time. Thanks for showing up here today. I'll just remind folks that a stream of this conversation is already available at CU Fourth Space, CU like Concordia University Fourth Space on our Facebook, and it'll appear on our YouTube channel as well very soon. I could put the link in the chat for those of you who are still here, or just check out concordia.ca/4 for this event and further events. And speaking of that, since I have one extra second year of your time. I just wanted to invite those of you who are still around to maybe come tomorrow. We are running two really great events. One of them is the second in our series of podcasts with the Black Perspectives Office, and that's at 3 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. And before that, from 12 to 2, we're working with Artfold to showcase some of the projects that have happened as a result of a residency and a collaborative kind of residency project, followed with a wiki workshop. So should be lots of fun. Thanks everybody for spending Thursday afternoon with us, and we will see you in February, if not tomorrow. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you,
Bye.
Anna. Thank you.
Bye.